you have to have a strategy, and then you kind of have to hold on to that strategy like relatively loosely. It can get really inefficient and wasteful if you don't really have a strategy, but be willing and able to respond really, really quickly to change that. Startups have a bias towards action. You know, it's kind of like when I try to do something around the house. I just start doing it. And I end up just being like, you know what? I just have to call somebody that knows what they're doing. And they'll come in and they'll put a plan together and they'll knock it out.
Content without strategy is a big waste of money. And then strategy without content is also a big waste of money.
This is Between Two Pixels, the podcast for anyone who wants to reach and connect with their audience through content and marketing.
Welcome to this episode of Between Two Pixels, the podcast for anyone who wants to reach and connect with their audience through content and marketing. My name is Josh, and I'm here with my business partner, Bryan Owen, and we are the co-CEOs of Between Pixels. It's so fun to be a co-something with you, Bryan.
It is, isn't it? Do you remember back to that decision in 2014 or 15?
Yes.
Oh, if we only knew then what we know now.
It'd be great. We should do a whole episode where we talk about how we became business partners.
That's a fascinating story. Whether anyone would care about it, I don't know, but it is a non-traditional path. That's what I would say.
It's great. You know, the moral, not the moral of the story, but I think the result is that, you know, we've married marketing and video together really well.
And two relatively different personalities. And
also content and strategy. What else can I put together like this?
Peanut butter and jelly.
It's perfect. Well, I will say this topic today is kind of, you know, an interesting thing because we're talking about marketing for startups. And I think it is interesting because I got a lot of calls like at the beginning for video content for startups. And so it's like now evolved, I think, you know, for us is that I would say on the marketing side, startups like working with us for lots of different reasons. And I think we do fairly well with them. But at first on the video side, it was because we were able to take their message and really like figure out something that resonated. And so a lot of times I've gotten calls in the past from people, CEOs and guys that are starting businesses or whatever. And they're like, I need a video because everyone like they need something compelling at the beginning. And it usually revolves around their message. And they have like a bunch of like opportunities they like to talk about. They have a bunch of problems that they know are in the market that they're trying to solve, but like they don't really have a great way to articulate it. And so they'll, I mean, sometimes even before they have like a logo, they're like, I have a business idea. I'm doing this. I've got the money, but I need video content, video. But, you know, for us on the marketing side, it's become something that I feel like we have the tools and we have the team and we kind of have a little bit more of like a recipe now when startups come to us and need help. And so I was like, I wanted to sit down with you and talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
So anyways, what are your thoughts on our evolution as working with startups and where we're at now as a company?
Yeah.
Just as like a little intro.
Well, I think you're right. It's evolved, but the content production, the traditional video production, as you said, that would be the first request usually. And a lot of times it's a little bit premature because they don't have a lot of the foundational stuff in place, which we can talk about. But I think it's been really exciting because I think that in some ways marketing for startups is really different. And in some ways it's not at all. You know what I mean? Yeah. And sometimes it's understanding how to tease out where to be traditional and what you really need, like what foundational stuff is important. And what you can kind of either skip over or you don't really need to do because you need to get to market quickly. And it's a very flexible, like, I think one of the things that we've done really well is been able to adapt to situations. And so we're very flexible. That's our business model is very flexible. The way we do work is very flexible and we have people who can adapt to situations. I think that suits really well for startups. So I'm excited. My background, as you know, I've worked at startups or as an agency for startups from the beginning. My first job in DC was for a startup that is now defunct.
Yeah.
I didn't know at the time that business model had zero chance of financial success.
And Defunct, that's like a brand agency.
It is, yes. That would be good. Yes, exactly.
It sounds
they
like
help
one.
companies go into the trash can. Basically, that's the agency model.
Here at Defunct.
Yeah. So I kind of cut my teeth on, even on the technology side, understanding how software works and how to design user experiences and stuff like that. And then that kind of merged into more of the creative side of companies, and then working for startups and like working in agencies and doing incubator kind of work. And so I love that. It's always been kind of really appealing to me personally. And I think we have the DNA to do it, because it does require an approach that is, knows what to skip and what not to, and kind of the fact that you have to operate at a different pace, and you have to test more. And there's just some things you have to do a little bit differently.
Definitely do things out of order sometimes.
It has out of order. Yep. And we've had, it's a lot of learning from your mistakes and figuring out what's important and stuff like that. But I don't know if that answered your question, but
no, it does.
It is nice. I think we're in a good position. I think that it does require a little bit of the DNA of people that understand what it is like to work for and with a startup.
So that's a little bit about like how we work and like why, maybe we're attractive for startups. But if a startup was going to do it correctly, what should be their first step in their marketing strategy?
So I think if you start at the beginning, you need to understand the product market fit. So you really need to understand what makes a difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and you have to be confident that you know your audience well enough to provide a product or service that is compelling. That's ground one, because you can do all the marketing and all the great marketing in the world, but if what you're offering isn't distinctly different or has some kind of value proposition, or you don't know how to communicate it, it doesn't really matter. So I think that sometimes that requires research. So if you don't have that research and understanding of the audience and the market and the competitive analysis, then that needs to be the first thing. So I think that's the very, very beginning of it. And then you have to have a strategy in place. I know there's a temptation to just start, agency or startups have a bias towards action, right? So they just want to kind of do stuff. And then you get to the point where it's like, you need to have
stuff.
Sometimes, yes, but that comes after. But you have to have a strategy, and then you kind of have to hold on to that strategy like relatively loosely, right? So you have to be able to know like where you're headed, and the strategy has to have some problem you're overcoming. But you need some confidence that you can align your resources, because if you have a few people internally and then you're working with an agency, it can get really inefficient and wasteful if you don't really have a strategy. Everybody has to be aligned on the strategy, but be willing and able to respond really, really quickly to change that. So there's some foundational things I think that need to be in place.
So I want to talk to you about identifying the target audience, but before I do, you're talking about strategy. So what is the difference between like a marketing strategy and a business strategy, or maybe even like a go-to-market strategy? Because I feel like sometimes we talk to startups and it's like, they're like, yeah, I've got a strategy. And it's like, the marketing part, is like a bullet point on the strategy, but really there's like 47 sub bullet points that they don't put down. That's like our job. And you're like, oh, I've got a strategy. It's like, that's not a strategy. That's that's like one, you have one marker. Yeah. So tell me, what are your thoughts on that? Like as far as the strategy piece goes? Yeah.
I mean, there's different ways to categorize it, but fundamentally the business strategy is going to be how you're going to make money, which there's overlap with the marketing strategy, but yes, the marketing strategy has to understand there's different components to it, but you could almost look at it like the marketing strategy has to answer a certain number of questions, right? It has to answer the questions of like, number one, who is our key audience? Okay. So what do they care about? How can I reach them? Two has to be, what are the messages that we need to communicate to them to make it resonate? Three, what are the channels and distribution options to getting that message in front of them? And kind of what are the value propositions? So I look at the marketing side of like, what is taking and attracting customers to the business model that you have already established. So they're definitely overlapping. But that is something that you don't need to do. I mean, the marketing strategy itself doesn't have to be I mean, you can pay an agency to spend 6 months or a year and spend millions of dollars on a marketing strategy. You don't really need that, but there are certain things that you can't really do without, because that's going to be answering the tangible questions about like, what's the customer journey? So like, once we talk to them, what are they going to do? How are we going to follow up with them, and what gets them closer to making a purchase decision? So there's certain questions that need to be answered, but you don't have to answer them in the same way every time. You can kind of simplify it and right size the marketing strategy for a startup, because it's going to look different than an established brand.
Do you think that startups know their target audience when they come in, when we work with them, or do you feel like they have a better grip on kind of the business value in the market, or like the problem they're trying to solve? Like, do they know their target audience? And if they don't, how do they figure that out?
I think they usually know. That's a good question. I in my experience, they know the business really well, and they usually know, almost always have enough domain experience where they understand who the audience is, so they could describe the audience. So the demographics of them, if it's a B2B startup, what their roles and responsibilities are, but they don't often understand how to connect with them, either like emotionally or like what's the right message, right? So they don't necessarily understand how they need to talk to them and where to find them, if that makes sense. So they can describe them demographically and all that stuff, which is great, but they don't necessarily know how to then translate that into, telling their story to them. So I think that's the gap that that we often come help out with. And that's usually something that's not a skill set within a startup team. You don't usually have that skill set on the founder team typically.
Yeah. So like, what tools do we use, or what methodologies do we use when we come in to do something like that?
Yeah. So we'll do a lot of research. So we'll do our own competitive analysis and try to understand where the value proposition, like where you fit in the market. And then it really depends on how much time we have. I mean, we do a lot of focus groups and we do some surveys. So that stuff is really helpful. A lot of times what it does is we'll find that if you have a founders group of like 4 or 5 people on a leadership team, they have like, you start asking questions, and part of it is just getting them in a room and going through the series of exercises that are really intended to kind of pull that information out, because you'll find that a lot of times there is conflict, like not in a bad way, but you'll say like, who our primary audience is and what do they care about? Like, what are the pain points? What's the baggage that they bring to the table? What assumptions are they making about what we're going to do or not do that they've been burned before? And you'll get very different answers. So a lot of the exercise at the beginning is really because you've got founders and entrepreneurs who are really focused and who are moving really, really quickly, but there's not always alignment because everything is new. They haven't established all this stuff yet. So they might not even have a go-to-market plan yet, or maybe they have one, but they don't have the nuances there. And so some of it is, yes, doing the research so that we can kind of add to what they already know. Like, we found that these are some of the comments, and so these are some of the pain points, and then working through some exercises that help pull the information out of the founders to get alignment on that. And then we turn that stuff into a framework, right? So like a messaging framework or a brand framework to basically do active listening and say, we've heard what you said, and these are the boxes that it fits into, and this is what we're going to use, and just kind of wrestling with that for a little bit. Until we get to the point where then everybody's on the same page with like who they're speaking to, what they care about, how they reach them, and stuff like that.
And that is such a useful thing for startups. I mean, a lot of times it's like brands that have been around a long time, they have that, and they know their voice and they know their messages. They know, and it goes so far beyond just like a visual identity. It goes into all those other aspects of how the brand speaks and interacts with customers and what it does and doesn't do. And like, how valuable is something, how important is that for a startup, in your opinion?
The foundational like brand assets?
Yeah, the brand identity piece of it. Like, what role does it play? Because I think for us, a lot of times when we work with startups, they come in and their brand identity is not the most important thing, because, things are changing so much. But like, what role does that play in the companies that we work with? And
yeah, no, you're right. A lot of times they'll come in and because they don't necessarily have someone that thinks about this all the time, it'll be like they'll have a logo and maybe a sales deck, and they'll be sometimes they'll kind of create their own logos, and the brand architecture isn't really figured out yet. And so they'll come up with names. And so, if you think about that, you get 4 or 5 or however many people on a leadership team that are really smart people. They really understand the industry. Their interpretations of what they're trying to do and how they're trying to do it and all those things are nuanced and different enough that they're usually different quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So the benefit of some of those, and I think what we're talking about specifically is like brand and messaging guides, and that will explain visually how do we communicate. The messaging guide talks a lot about the personality so that they know, so everyone can kind of be unleashed to go and communicate on behalf of the brand, but you can trust that it's done in a way that reinforces each other, right? Because what you don't want to have happen is you're trying to get traction in a market and everybody's speaking about the brand a little bit differently, and they're using a different value proposition. They're using different identities. The consumer who is now for the first time exposed to this new brand is confused. Just like if you meet a person and they've got multiple personalities or they present themselves differently, you're like, I don't understand how to connect with you. I don't understand who you are and what you care about because you're speaking differently and you're behaving differently to me all the time, and you can't really make a connection with them. So I think a lot of those assets really help solidify to make sure that like we all agree, at least for the time being, it's going to change. This is the way that we represent ourselves. When we talk to people, this is the tone we use. This is the type of language, because it's been intentional that we know that that's different than what's out there in the market. Right. So maybe we're I don't know, we're the brand kind of to break through that's like the individualist. So if that's what you are, then you're going to speak in a certain way and you're going to present yourself in a certain way. And so you have to make sure everyone understands, no, that's how we communicate. That's how we respond. So then you can use everybody can kind of apply their resources and their talents to really working on something that ends up being consistent in the market.
Yeah. No, that's good. One of the things that I notice sometimes is that the startups we work with don't yet have a product market fit that's like perfect.
Yeah.
They have an idea and they have a pain point, but then depending on how the market responds to that and to what they're trying to create. So sometimes it's like this dance and it's like, okay, this is what we're going to do. And this is kind of the reason why all the things you're talking about happen, why they disagree, and why they have a bunch of smart people trying to solve a problem and they have a good solution. But then the market's like, well, we actually want this, or they'll look at opportunities and they'll be like, well, we need to tweak it a little bit to fit this opportunity. And like you start not a square peg in a round hole, but you kind of start customizing on the fly, which then impacts your brand. It impacts your marketing. It impacts your material. So a lot of times, that is probably just a natural part of how quickly things move nowadays and like how things aren't completely buttoned up before the product goes to market, but it's like moving in the right direction. So that's kind of a setup for this. How then, or I would say like what kind of agency partner does a startup need if that's the reality? Because it does seem like that is the reality.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple characteristics you need. I think you need a partner who obviously is flexible. Not everybody is flexible.
Are you flexible?
Not
You've been working
physically
on it.
Very inflexible. However,
you can touch your toes now. I saw you do it yesterday.
Yeah, depends on the day, but yeah, I can do some of that stuff. But there is, from like a personality standpoint, agencies have a personality just like individuals, and they kind of take on the characteristics and some of the culture that is important to them. And so I think you need to find somebody who understands that that's just the reality, that doesn't get frustrated when it's like, hey, I know I told you this yesterday, but we're going to do the exact opposite today. Yeah. You just need someone who can like respond to that. Right. You need, I think, a partner with a broad range of skill sets, because you're going to ask people to do stuff. You need someone who understands how to think about brand architecture and the relationship among all the entities in a brand, but who also understands messaging and copywriting, and who also understands how you're going to make money. So you kind of need people, because because you need to rely on a fewer number of people to do a lot more different things because they're an extension of your team. So you have to be able to trust that the agency has the skill set and the people who are more T-shaped, who can do more than one thing at an individual level, but then who can kind of scale up and back as you need to. Right?
Well, and that just for people to understand what the T-shape is. So like you have like I-shaped positions, which would be like a column that doesn't extend. They're more like tech specialists.
Yeah. Really good at one thing.
Yeah. The T is more like it goes up and you have branches off either side. So you have something that you're good at, you're hired for, but then you have your T. So like when we hire people, we always say like, we're hiring something in that center column that's going to be their main skill set, but their T branches like might have different things. So for a marketer, it could be like, let's just say you're a designer. Well, they might have a little web over here and they might have a little copy editing over here. For a strategist, I mean, it could be like you could hire a strategist who's also a designer over here, but they're not the primary designer, but then they're going to be able to do like web or copy editing or something. So there's like all these like cool things. I mean, placement, there's like all these little things you need to be able to do. So that is a good point. I mean, I feel like we're kind of just saying that we would be great to work with startups. I mean, and that's
there are other agencies that also can do it, but they have to have certain characteristics that you just need to make sure that they have in place. And it's not just, and some companies have worked with startups, but they've only done certain things like, we can do motion graphic videos for startups. Right. And that's a little bit, it's not easy to do, but if that's all you're doing versus being embedded, I mean, we can either do, we'll do a video that helps a company articulate their vision, and that that's like a lot of wrestling and hard work in that. But, but we're also working more on the partnership level where they're like, we need you to help us navigate all of this stuff. We need someone to be part of our team, our leadership team, that is coming from a marketing and a content strategy perspective, but who also is not so close to what we're doing that they can bring in new ideas that we had never thought about. Yeah. So I think that's an important thing too. Most of the really good ideas I think that our company has come up with has been when we've taken an industry that is completely unrelated. So maybe it's like we take an idea or something that we've done or someone else has done in sports or hospitality, and we've applied that to healthcare. And it's been like this breakthrough thing because like the healthcare experts aren't thinking about that because they don't have the experience in these other industries. So I think that's another important thing too, is to make sure that, you can get myopic, because I've been on the other side of like helping lead startups, and you get really focused and you don't realize what you don't know. And I think there's a reception and an openness to working with an agency or agencies who can challenge you in a healthy way, who are not just being like, yes, I'll do whatever you say, but who are able to be like, you know what, this might be a better idea. Let's think about that. And so that's the healthiest relationships we've had. And we'll tell them in a meeting. I was in a meeting the other day and I was like, so before we have this meeting, we feel like our job is to challenge some of the assumptions that you're making about your business. And they were like, that's exactly what we want. So I was like, it's not going to be contentious, because what you decide to do, we're going to support 100%, but we're not just going to say, yeah, let's do that if we don't agree with it. And we're going to make sure that once the idea is up there, we're trying to poke holes in it so that it is the best idea for your business. Yeah. And that's kind of the relationship you want. And so it requires a lot of trust and not just here, I want this agency to do this thing for me. It's like, this is what I think I want, but I want you to push back and tell me when that thing isn't what we should be doing. Right. Yeah. So
that's good. So, we've talked about the fact that working with us is what every startup should do.
Yeah.
So that's so if you want to make, exactly. So if you want to make the right, wise choices with your startup, hire Between Pixels. So that's like the positive. Yeah. On the flip side.
Okay.
Here we go. What are some mistakes that you feel like you've seen startups make, or what are some things that they should just be looking out for? Because we hope this is helpful content for, any startup entrepreneurs and folks. What are some pitfalls you've seen?
It's a good question. I'm trying to think of my personal experience working in startups that either have had success or not. A few of them that I've worked with, or for, have just kind of pivoted into something else. And I think that's that's a success story for a lot of them. So I would say you have to have a certain level of stubbornness, to really believe in what you're doing. But then you have to balance that with open-mindedness. So like Instagram, I think, is a good example where it's fundamentally different than what it was intended to do. So a lot of the tech startups started as one thing, and then they found like a feature set that was really working, and they're like, why don't we do that? Because that's what everybody wants to do.
Yeah.
So I think that is finding the right balance between being like, a lot of startups are successful because people told them it will never work, and they're like, I don't care what you say, I'm going to do it anyway. And so there's a level of stubbornness, but you have to balance that with the ability to recognize what the market is telling you and do that. The only other thing is, and I don't know if this is necessarily a mistake that's been made, but there's a lot of wasted time and effort because I think sometimes we feel pressured to start creating stuff. We want to start doing marketing content. So it's like the market isn't waiting for us. And so if we don't get out there and start doing things, going to events and doing all this stuff, like we're going to miss out on the opportunity, right? And so there's this pressure to act, and there's a bias toward action because that's what entrepreneurs do. But a lot of times we end up we kind of like starting and then we'll kind of have to backtrack a little bit. So some of the stuff you talked about before, the brand architecture and the brand messaging and the visual identity, all that stuff really needs to be figured out at least to a certain point where you can move forward. So we have worked on projects before where we're trying to create say like a video, like a 2-minute video that's like a vision video that paints the vision of the startup, what they're trying to accomplish, how they're going to change the world. But they don't have any of that other stuff in place. And so inevitably we'll film something or we'll start working on something. And then they're just like,
we don't do that anymore.
That's not really it. Like, and we're like, okay. And we try to solve it like in some other way, but then we end up backtracking and being like, okay, yes, we have to go back. We need these foundational elements to make sure that what we're saying is we're able to speak with conviction and we're doing it in the right way. And because all of those decisions on the creative side are going to be based off of the core foundational brand assets that, sometimes we end up skipping. So that would be the other thing. We usually get there, but it ends up taking longer. It's kind of like when I try to do something around the house, like I try to repair something or build something, right? It's like, I just start doing it and I don't really know what I'm doing.
Measure once, cut twice. That's what they say.
It doesn't matter how many times I measure it. It still doesn't turn out right because either something's not plumb or the measurements are different. And so I'll start doing stuff and I don't really have a plan or a good plan. And I end up just being like, you know what? I just have to call somebody that knows what they're doing, and they'll come in and they'll put a plan together and they'll knock it out. And I'll spend more money than I would have originally and a lot of frustration.
And more time.
Way more time.
Do you think that that's something that startups do?
I think so. I think there is a temptation and there's a lot of pressure to see momentum quickly. And so I think there's some ways to mitigate that. You don't necessarily need to stop everything and say like, we're going to wait 6 months, because sometimes that's not possible. But depending on the financing situation and their business model, you can start doing like little pilot projects. That's another way to do it, is to say like, let's not let's not take time and do like a waterfall approach where we like figure all this out and then we start launching. You can figure out enough of it to start doing some testing and see what the market. There's a lot of classic examples of that, of like putting out something and seeing if the market responds to it even before you're ready. So a lot of products will do this. They're not ready to sell, but they'll put out a landing page and do some marketing and test messaging to see if it resonates. And if it resonates, great. Then guess what? You put your name on a list. It might be 6 months before the product is ready to sell, but at least we told you and we knew that you're interested. So there's ways to get around that you don't have to stop, but it does require some effort.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we've worked with startups in so many various capacities. Like we've obviously, like I've done stuff with like nonprofit startups, done stuff with like big, when Airbus Aerial came to Atlanta, we worked with them right out of the gate. I mean, we're talking like Airbus, like the company that makes planes in Europe, said, we want a drone division. And a guy wrote up a business plan that went to tech, and he was working in California, and they were like, we like that. We're going to make you the president of that. And he called me and was like, I need a video to tell people what this is.
Right.
And it's literally,
and we're like, what is it?
And I'm like, okay. So that's an example where they were literally building the bridge and he was selling vision. It was just like, yeah, they'll be flying cars one day. You know, I'm like, well, we probably shouldn't put that in the video, you know, quite yet. You know, like what is it going to do? Like,
how's that help you
in the first 6 months? It's
Yeah.
like, oh, we're going to fly drones around and we're going to like, you know, look at, they used to have helicopters do it, and we're going to do it with drones, and we're going to look at, you know, power lines, inspect power lines. Just inspecting power lines is a huge thing.
Yeah.
And you don't have to send a person up there anymore. It's like, that works. So let's put that in the video. So it was literally like, you know, like me doing research, like asking, pulling questions out, like, tell me more about the product, you know, because that's the thing is like, you know, entrepreneurs can sell vision, but you know, how we're going to get to that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's others as well.
People don't usually spend money on vision. They spend money on something that solves a problem.
Yeah. You know, so I feel like there is that adaptation that's like always happening, you know, so that flexibility is really important. And I do notice that we've worked with we've worked with clients. I don't want to say nonprofits, but because that is on the top of my head, but like, you know, we've worked with startups that are in various fields, and then they're in different kind of like places of like, do they even have a product? That's one. It might be like almost like vaporware in a way, but then there's clients. So that's one where you're just trying to figure out like, all right, I have an idea. We know what we're going to do. You're trying to get people to buy it. And then we have others that physically have something that works, but it might not be 100% what they're actually going to make money on. So then you're trying to figure out a way to adapt a core market into a new product. And I see that too. It's like, all right, so yeah, we have this thing over here and the tail starts to wag the dog, because then you're creating something for a thing that's not going to be the future, but you're trying to like shift your energy into this new product. And so it's a challenge, but it's probably just part of the game. And then we've had others where we did the one with the electric boat launch thing.
Yeah.
It was like a brand new product, like brand new thing completely. It was like basically a boat version of a Tesla. And it was like taking this thing and like
no prototype,
nothing. Like, how do you do something with that? And so we did that, even named it and did all the different aspects of it. So, you know, you really do need to have, and now maybe, you know, we're just very adaptable and flexible in a lot of ways, and sometimes to our own detriment. Like, we need to be more specific. So like, they're definitely different but it does make us able to work with startups, I think. Which, anyways, that was just on the tip of, just on my brain. I was just thinking through all those different areas. But in your mind, you know, if a startup, I mean, you can pick any one of those as an example, but needed to focus on one thing in marketing, like what do you think it would be? Because obviously, like, I just named a few different kind of stereotypes of different, you know, startups or whatever. But all of them probably share some commonalities of things they need to focus on. So regardless of where a startup is, what are your thoughts on what they should focus on if they could only focus on one thing?
That's a hard one. I don't think that's a reality in most cases, but we'll use it as a thought exercise.
Yeah. So just because it helps, because there's
because
too
it does
many
force
things.
focus. But the reality of a startup is you have to work in parallel. And so it's the juggling of all those things that are happening at the same time. Like,
so
that's
focus
part of the
on
challenge
juggling
to it. Focus on juggling it. I would say though that maybe another way is what's the thing that is not valued enough, or maybe not focused on enough, and that is just really understanding the customer really, really well. Because in 6 months, a lot of the assumptions that you've made are probably incorrect. And if you miss some of the signals that could cause your company to shift in a certain way, then that's going to be to your detriment, because you're going to be spending a lot of time and money on things that don't end up getting you to the end. So I think it'd be understanding the customer. There's a lot of different ways to do that, but you don't have to stop everything to do that. But if you had the luxury of being like, I'm going to spend 6 months studying the customer, the outcome of that would be pretty amazing in terms of what you're able to do and how much money you could save on on maybe things that you shouldn't have spent your time on that you would have otherwise.
Yep.
So
I like
don't know,
that.
What are your thoughts?
No, I like that a lot, because imagine, you don't really know the customer profile. I mean, you can make personas and you can kind of figure out, all right, this is what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to target, but you don't know who's going to respond. And so then when people do start responding, you look at the data, you're like, oh, it's actually this group that is resonating more with these messages. But if you don't have that data up front, you haven't done the work to really go deep with the personas and the audience and the research, maybe doing some focus groups and doing different things and just, talking to your existing base and see who's interested and who's
or doing experiments. I mean, experiments are a great way to do it too, is like, how can we test our theories about what resonates in the market? Like, that's research.
Because you're making a bunch of assumptions based off of you mentioned decisions based off assumptions, and you're spending money based off assumptions if you don't do research. I know it's not necessarily a startup, but in a way it's kind of an evolving client. But our healthcare brand that we work with, I know you've mentioned this before, but it's like when we did research around what clients say they just like really want quality. It was like quality service or whatever. It was like
quality healthcare.
Quality healthcare. What does quality healthcare mean? When I think of quality healthcare, I think about like the level
outcomes.
I think I'm like a good surgery where I don't die, and good recovery time.
Yeah.
But what did they say quality meant to them?
Yeah, that's a good point, because if we would have acted on that, then you're right. It would have been focused on things like the qualifications of the doctors. All the communication would have been about the outcomes that are achieved and things like that. But we dug into it and we realized quality was actually a bit more about the experience that they get, and simple things like feeling like the doctor cares and is listening to them. Mm-hmm. Literally, quality is like a doctor that looks me in the eye and asks me questions and gives a crap about what I say.
It doesn't matter if they prescribe you the wrong medicine.
They could not know what they're doing, and it could sound. But from the consumer's eyes,
actors to listen.
Yes, exactly. But from the patient's eyes, that's how they're going to make their choices in healthcare, and so that is a great example of that. So we have another startup we're working with right now, and it's they've got a lot going on. I mean, it's a big opportunity. And they're trying to wrestle with not only do they have direct to consumer market, they've got like a whole reseller partnership market that they're looking into. They've got a whole suite of products. They're trying to figure out their brand architecture. Do they all have brand names? Do they have unique names? Which features there's all of this stuff going on at the same time. And so we're trying to help make sense of all of this. Right. Mm-hmm. And so part of it is helping tease out and test some of these things so that we can give them some good guidance on like a number of factors that are happening at once. And so they don't have the luxury of waiting for 6 months. And so a lot of it is just trying to put out little experiments and tests so that we can kind of figure out which direction it's like, investing a little bit here and there in multiple companies. I work for a startup where their business model, these billionaires, they would invest in dozens of companies that were doing similar things to give them the opportunity to learn more about what those companies did. And then eventually they would not double down, whatever it is, 12 times down, put all their money into one of them. Yeah. Because they're like, this is the one that has it right. And they wouldn't have, the only reason they invested a little bit over the course of time in these other ones is to give them more information to make a better decision. So I feel like that's kind of how startups need to approach it, is like, let's invest a little bit in this and then use that information to really kind of start to fire, on what we need to. So
it's we just read the book Great by Choice as a leadership team at the beginning of 2024, and one of the principles in there is fire bullets, not cannonballs, and that's exactly like what you're talking about. Like, you need to fire some bullets and before you just kind of go all in on something. So I think it's something that resonates, something we try to apply to just whenever we're doing something, we want to launch something new. It's like you can't really it's almost like little mini startup tests. Mm-hmm. Every time you're going to launch something new or do a new service. It's like going all in on something and dumping a bunch of money into it probably isn't the best choice until you figure out how the market is going to respond. Yeah. But I don't know. Is there anything else? We're kind of getting to the end of our time for the episode, but like, what are your closing remarks.
No, I'm just thinking about, being in the other side where I'm working at a startup trying to figure out, how do we maximize and use the resources that we're given, the financial resources and otherwise, knowing we've got a small team, some of those decisions. And I think sometimes it can feel overwhelming to like find an agency and hire somebody. And again, we're biased because we own the company, but we've designed our company in a way that is helpful to startups. But regardless of who you use, I think to recognize that you're going to need to work with somebody outside of your company in some form or fashion. And so try to find somebody who makes it easy to work with, right? Mm-hmm. So like our solution for a lot of that stuff is to create products and services that are really easy for startups to buy. So we can come in and be like, we'll just do an audit and it's not expensive, but we'll give you our take and help you figure out kind of where you need to invest from like a marketing and branding standpoint. Mm-hmm. Or we'll do a really startup focused like social media campaign where it's like 6 months and it doesn't cost a ton and we'll start to build some momentum in social media for you. Or we'll do some market research for you, or we'll be an outsourced fractional CMO for you. So like if that's what you need, if you don't have anybody in place for that, we'll have our whole, maybe 4 or 5 people participate. Mm-hmm. And we'll help kind of fill that gap until you can get there. Yeah. So to find an agency that has ways that they have proven that work to work with, but they're also flexible. They have like products and services that are designed to accommodate some of the unique ways that startups work. Yeah. Because a lot of those things, an established agency or some of the bigger brands we work with wouldn't really be that interested in because they've either already done it or like they certainly don't need a fractional CMO or someone to jump in at that level. Yeah. But they do need somebody to kind of fill in the gaps and that's flexible enough to do that. So I think that I would encourage startups to reach out and find some partners to work with, even though sometimes it feels like it's like going to be really expensive and it's going to be hard to onboard. There are agencies that are basically designed to make it really easy to get started and to kind of fill in gaps in a way that provides value pretty quickly.
Yeah. And I think for us, all the things that we do in those things that you mentioned, like whatever way that we're going to work, it can feel a lot of times like it's a grab bag of services, but it all centers around strategy and content. Yeah. So no matter what we're doing, whether it's fractional CMO or it's like you need us to come in and figure out some stuff for you. You need video content. You might need some design pieces or like you need your brand refresh. It all breaks down into you need someone to be doing the strategy, making sure that's dialed in. And then you need content, whether that's video or design or social or whatever that is. Email. And when you put those two together, strategy with content is a great recipe in whatever kind of like whatever little widgets of it you need. Content without strategy is a big waste of money. Mm-hmm. And then strategy without content is also a big waste of money because all you have is great, cool just strategy.
Pontificate.
Wonderful. And then you don't have anything to really market. So that's kind of what we try to do. And we just turn those dials in the right way that it needs to happen. Yeah. Well, this has been good. I think this is a great topic for folks. And we love working with startups. So if you have one, then, come and see us, give us a call. Yeah. We'd be excited to talk to you, but, if there's nothing else, then I'll just say, if you enjoyed this content and you want to hear more stuff, go check out our podcast, give it a listen. Just like us and subscribe on YouTube so we can, reach more folks with cool content.
Yeah. Solve some more problems.
Bye.